What's up everyone, and welcome to Drive, Wrench, and Repeat. Today we're bringing you the 2011 BMW 135i and the 2020 BMW M2 Competition. They're years apart, but this series is going to focus on the BMW 135i and the potential that it has as an ultimate daily driver going up against the ultimate M car, the M2 Competition. Can this car keep up with this car with some modifications? So we're going to change this car into a full bolt-on car, but at the same time, maintenance is probably the most important thing in a turbocharged BMW. So we'll focus on the maintenance as well as the full bolt-on. Can this car keep up with the M2 Competition? Join us for this series and join us for the journey. So let's take this car for a drive and give you my personal impressions of my daily driver, this 135i. This specific model is a manual, Alpine white with coral red interior, 3,400 pounds, inline 6-cylinder, N55. This car specifically, the N55, has a twin scroll turbo. So the twin scroll turbo is when 3 cylinders are feeding simultaneously into a single turbo, and the N54 had a true twin turbo. That's where some of the mistakes of the N54 were corrected with the N55. Not to say that the twin scroll turbo is a better horsepower output, but it is more reliable. There's obviously certain things that plague the N54 as well as the N55, which are going to be the water pump, the oil filter housing gasket, as well as the various different typical BMW oil leaks. The valve covers are going to start to leak, as well as the oil pan gasket, and the most infamous, the oil filter housing gasket. And the most important thing to note about the oil filter housing gasket is the fact that if that starts leaking and gets on the serpentine belt, and you have the serpentine belt basically getting chewed up and ruining your entire motor. That's a catastrophic issue with these cars. Always change the oil filter housing gasket, which the previous owner on this car has done, thankfully. Also, another issue with the N54 as well as the N55 are going to be the water pump and the thermostat. And the reason for that is the N54 and the N55 actually have an electronic water pump. And for that reason, the shelf life for a water pump is usually around 100,000 miles. And that's really pushing the water pump because it's got an electric board in there. It's not working off of a belt. And that's certainly a preventative maintenance item that should be done on every N54 and N55 car. And then your run-of-the-mill typical maintenance that you should be doing, always use high-quality synthetic oil. I'm currently using 0W40 Castrol synthetic in here. It's been great so far. I ran a couple of Blackstone oil analysis, coming out great, better than expected in terms of the average. So it's been super reliable. I currently have 159,000 miles and 500. So 500 miles away from hitting 160,000 miles. Seems like a lot, but this car, you will not think that this car actually has 160,000 miles. So let's talk about, I named a good amount of things that are plaguing the N55 as well as the N54s. But let's talk about the comparison with the S55 and the N55, since we're really digging into why I want to benchmark against the M2 Competition, and not the traditional, M2. The regular M2 that first launched came with an N55. Hence why I just don't see the upside in comparing it when there's a more superior M2 model. And I'm sure the N55 M2 fanboys are going to get mad that I said that, but it's really the same motor that's in here, that's in the M2, with slight variances, obviously. So if we're talking about comparison with the S55 and the N55, they still share 75% of the components, which is a lot, to say the least. It's a lot. But this specific motor, the N55 motor, is an open deck, and the S55 is a closed deck. One of the main differences there, the S55 being a closed deck has a much more rigidity on the top of the motor. And what does that mean? It can take a lot more abuse than this N55, and they do sell like a closed deck kit, but if you're not making, some major serious power, and I'm not intending to do that with this car, you don't really need to go down that route. The rabbit hole is pretty deep there. Might as well get a S55 car if that's your plan. But the S55 is also a true twin turbo, right? Not like the twin squirrel here. And the true twin turbo nature just gives it ability to have more power. This car the N55 can push. It comes from the factory. It's gonna bounce back and forth from like 7 to 8. But it's not a ton of boost for this car, and hence why you get 300 horsepower and 300 foot-pounds of torque. Daniel's car, the M2 Competition, there's just a lot more noticeable horsepower, and that comes from the S55 and the ability to really take that car on the track or do some really serious hardcore spirited driving, and it's not gonna really plague you with oil starvation like this car could if you took this on the track, because it's not a dual pickup like the S55 is. The S55 also comes with a dual fuel pump. Think about that, right? This car does not. I talked about the fuel pump earlier, but even though it's high pressured, the S55 has a dual high pressure fuel pump, which is, you're talking about double the capacity, maybe, right? And there's a lot more tunability with that car versus this car, and it can take the abuse. Why can it take the abuse? It has so much more cooling capabilities than this car. This is an air-to-air intercooler. The S55 is a liquid-to-air intercooler. It also has various different coolers for, like, if you have a DCT, it has a DCT cooler. It also has a much bigger oil cooling capacity because of the oil cooler. I believe there's something like 17 components to cool all the different things within M2 Competition. Just mind-blowing what that does. This car does have an oil cooler. It's really small, but talk about 17 different things that cools your car, because it's a real M car. This car is not an M car. I'm gonna say that again. It's an M package, and let's talk about the so-called M package in these 135s. It really means a different fascia, the bumper, different rear bumper, the suspension slightly different. It's gonna have stiffer and lowered springs, and it's got like the steering wheel, the sport seats, right? It's got the extendable legs, which is great. But it's really a lot of cosmetic stuff versus actual performance stuff. Oh yeah, this car it still has some juice. To do on this car, I have a laundry list. At least to comfortably and reliably do a full bolt on, this car is going to need a few things. And before we get into that, I certainly want to show you why this car was my pick of the litter in terms of a reliable, but let's give it some juice here. It makes torque starting from 1200 RPM. What does that mean? There's plenty of power to cruise around the street, but when you hit it, there's plenty of power to pass people on the highway. And for practicality purposes, it hit all the check boxes. So I keep saying that this car is no slouch in the power department, and it's not. It handles quite well. It could be better, but for what it is, it certainly has enough power. The power delivery is really smooth. I mean, you get this flat torque that starts from 1200, and then the horsepower that kind of peaks out at 300 horsepower at 5400 RPM. But anything past that, you're kind of falling, you know, you're falling flat on your face because of how small the turbos are. And that's the advantage of a twin turbo versus a single twin scroll turbo that we have in this car. But nonetheless, this car is really practical, and every time I smash the gas on this car, it's really smooth. No complaints there. So let's give it a little juice here. Oh yeah. Hoo-wee. Yeah. So what's on the agenda for this car and this project? So number one, maintenance is really important for this car, as well as any other BMW, especially the turbocharged models, just because of how hot these cars get. So let's start with the basics. We're gonna do a fresh fluid change, oil, differential, as well as the manual transmission fluid. And then we're gonna move on to some of the wear and tear items. Number one, the engine mount is probably toast at this point, as well as the transmission mounts. And then some of the bushings, like the subframe bushings, as well as the control arm bushings. We will certainly look at those and change them out. And I think it is due for a change for some of the rubber things, like the bushings, like the mounts that we just talked about. And then the performance maintenance that we need to do, like the spark plugs, the coils, some of the more problematic things like the oil filter housing gasket. I'm gonna check the engine and around where and if there are leaks, and we'll address those, even the valve cover. That is something that's on the list. We will see how much oil is actually leaking. That should be remedied. And then once that is all finally done in terms of the maintenance items that we're talking about on the screen here, we will move on to the full bolt-on mods. And what does full bolt-on mean again? It means a larger intercooler, which I don't have. It also means a catless downpipe, which I don't have at the moment on the car, but we do have it that's ready to go on. And then charge pipe, air intake, as well as a catback exhaust, which this car has. And then ultimately, to kind of tie everything together, we're gonna tune this car with MHD. MHD has been kind of the leader in the space of tuning by online kind of downloaded app. So it's super simple. I think we're gonna go with the full bolt-on Stage 2 Plus. Stay tuned, and we'll show you the videos of what's going to be implemented, what's going to be installed, as well as how the car performs with all of these different mods, as well as the tune. Of course, burbles are subjective, but we are thinking about getting a burble tune just to see how this car is going to sound with a catless downpipe. But more to come. Stay tuned, guys. I think you'll enjoy this series on how well this car is going to drive, as well as how reliable it is. certain things that we're going to learn on the way, working on a car of this caliber. You know, it's not an S55, it's not an M2 Competition, but we're certainly going to try to chase that car. So I talked a lot about the 135i, specifically the N55 model, which we're driving today. If you're looking to buy a 135 and you're watching this video, keep in mind it's a fantastic car. You know, they don't make the 1 Series anymore, at least in the US. They're not bringing the 1 Series over for whatever reasons. Maybe there just wasn't enough demand, or people just don't like really small cars like this. But keep in mind that this is a fantastic car, especially on a bargain. For me, it's a perfect daily driver. I don't mind leaving this car anywhere, parked anywhere, taking a couple of door dings here and there. It's not perfect, but that's what I wanted, an imperfect car, so that I can kind of be free about driving it and no hesitations about driving it anywhere. It's been absolutely reliable, and it's mod friendly to a certain extent. So if you're joining us today and if you're watching this to think about buying a 135, do it. It's one of the best cars I've purchased so far out of the 20 something that I've owned in the past. So definitely enjoy the car for what it is. And if you're thinking about a 1 Series or a 3 Series, the positive things are that it shares a lot of the components. It's very similar, and this car is no longer here in the US, so it's very unique when you see a 1 Series, and you don't see that many around. It's a good feeling. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you for coming with us on this ride of exploring the 135i. But make sure to subscribe to our channel. We're going to be bringing you the full journey on the full bolt-on. We're going to be bringing you the full review of the M2 Competition, along with various different M cars, various different BMWs, various different Euro cars, Japanese cars, you name it. We got a pack full schedule for this year of videos that we want to bring you. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, join us for this journey and many more. Appreciate it, guys.